All right. Well, I will start by saying I have a little stopwatch here. So once I get going, I can track myself to make sure I don't go too far. Um, again, which is, of course, not a problem because I'm sure you're all so engrossed that you don't lose track of time at all. With that being said, um, I would say that the eschatological precedence for time limits would probably be 3.5 years. So I don't think I'm anywhere we're near that limit there. We are in Revelation 13 today, and we're in the midpoint of it. Last time I took a little rabbit trail delving into the um, Antichrist, the doctrine, and everything that goes in with that. But today we're going to get back to the main substance of the text here, and we're going to focus on everyone's favorite subject, especially when it comes to end times and prophecy, and that would be Christian persecution. I'm sure everyone loves the concept of it. I'm sure you've seen or have heard of illustrations of persecution and where your mind naturally goes with that. Obviously, the word to persecute does not exclusively mean physical torture. It can mean any sort of pursuit, whether that is political, physical, or otherwise. But Christian persecution is a question, I think, of concern for some, because the challenge is twofold. First is that we live in a rather comfortable time to be alive, at least in this country, as a Christian, where as much as we might struggle, our struggles really are quite simple. They're not that challenging in the grand scheme of what they could be. In light of if you were to read historical accounts, to go through things like Fox's Book of Martyrs and to see how far the world really can push things. And so the first challenge of dealing with this subject is to think about that side of it, that we're rather comfortable and there's not really a desire to want to change that. But then the other side of it is how far will they go? What can I actually handle? And that's where all the nightmare scenarios start popping up. And one of them that often comes to not only my mind, but I've seen it in depictions and movies and so on, trying to illustrate what it might look like. They often do it in a rather poorly produced way, but I get the imagery there, where you and others have been caught by the in some of these movies, it would be the armies of the beast, and they have pulled you into a side room in the middle of nowhere, and you're lined up and blindfolded, and they're going to go through and start executing you one by one. And how do we handle that sort of a situation? And obviously, that sort of thing you can expound upon even more to make it even scarier. Especially if you're a parent, you can make things even far more of a inconceivable nightmare, and then come to that roadblock of, well, what do I do with that? Now, on the one hand, it's not guaranteed that that's going to happen to you, but we don't harm ourselves in being prepared for the worst case scenario, and that's what we're going to kind of try to address today. But Christian persecution is not limited to the end, and it's not limited to random portions of history. It's permeated throughout, for example, the Old Testament. The example I think of is Elijah. It was someone I was thinking of recently because I watched this documentary where they had gone up to where the real Mount Sinai actually is, where the split rock was at Horeb, and then going up the mountain and seeing the charred top of the mountain where Moses likely would have gone. But then just underneath that, a couple hundred years likely later, there's this little cave, an opening to a cave, and it's not very deep. It might be as deep as this room, maybe less. And it's certainly not as wide, as far as I could see. It's a small little cave opening. And they believe that this is likely the cave that Elijah ran to, because if you go back to 1 Kings 19, you'll read the account where Jezebel is rather mad with Elijah after he's gone through and killed quite a few of the false prophets. And so she declares that he will not survive. And so he panics and decides to make his way out into the wilderness. And it would have been quite the journey. It would have been over the course of days for him to make out where he was going to be. And so that chapter follows as he leaves and then eventually makes his way out in the wilderness. And despite its history, this location would have been empty. There likely wasn't anyone else there. It was, after all, the wilderness. It was middle of nowhere. And as Elijah's likely walking up to the mountain, he would have seen remnants of where the Israelites would have gathered, where they had created the golden calf, where many of them would have died as punishment for their rebellion, and then ultimately climbing up the mountain that Moses and the elders would have ascended, and then finding a little cave to hide in. So you can kind of give an idea as to why Elijah would have run here. But of course, you know the story. He goes into the cave, and then God shows up and begins to ask him what he's doing here. And Elijah, of course, gives his answer. But the fascinating portion of that story is that he gives his answer twice. The first time he gives the answer is to say, look, they've killed all the other prophets. I mean, everything is just gone, and I'm the only one left alive, and they're wanting to kill me too. And if they kill me, then there's nobody left. Then, of course, God provides all these visual demonstrations for Elijah before then asking the question again, what are you doing here? And you can almost sense Elijah would have given a slightly more timid response, saying, well, they're trying to kill me, and they've killed everyone else, and I'm it. And then God gives his answer, then sending Elijah to Damascus and letting him know that there are 7,000 others who have not bowed the knee to Baal. And of course, Paul references that text as well. And so in the Old Testament, we have illustrations of suffering. We have the same in the New Testament. In 2 Corinthians 11, Paul gives an entire rundown of exactly how he suffered, because the Corinthians thought in some way or another that Paul was no longer qualified, or was at the very least nowhere near as appealing as these new apostles that were showing up. And so he gives an entire rundown of his history, and his qualification as an apostle was in part how he was persecuted, in contrast to how they weren't. And how he had been shipwrecked and spent nights in the wilderness alone, dealing with both animals and robbers and suffering sickness and so on, an entire breakdown of how he had suffered continuously on top of the suffering that he had as a result of his concern for all of the churches. And then, of course, the primary example we have of suffering is the Lord himself. If they persecuted him, we ought to expect the same for ourselves. And Jesus says as much. He says in Luke 21, but before all these things, referencing, again, the end times, they will lay their hands on you and will persecute you, delivering you to the synagogues and prisons, bringing you before kings and governors for my name's sake. And then in John 15:20, he sets a rule here for us. Remember the word that I said to you, a slave is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they had kept my word, they would have kept yours also. And so he's setting a precedence here that if they are not keeping the words of Christ, if they're not a follower of him, then they will inevitably persecute you. Now, again, that's not limited to them hunting you down and imprisoning you and killing you. Persecution can come in all kinds of forms. But the rule is set. They hate Christ and they can't get to him, therefore they get to you. Even in the post-biblical era, the early church was far from exempt, with the persecution of the saints permeating history. Again, we have things like Fox's Book of Martyrs. We can go into the Reformation era and everything that happened after that, and even in the modern age. Persecution is not limited to physical torture, but includes any and all attempts to drive the Christian out of their beliefs, or, in the event that the Christian does not break, to remove them from the world altogether. So either they will persecute you to break you and get you to quit, or if they can't do that, then they'll just try to take you out of the picture altogether. But then we have persecution described in eschatology, and this is where we're going to narrow down here, because we know persecution is throughout history. We know that we are likely to experience it in some form or another. We are guaranteed to experience it in some form or another, even in the country we live in. But in the Old Testament, it clearly looks forward to a specific period where this is going to happen. In Daniel 7, 8, 11, and 12, there are references to this. In Daniel 7, 21, and verse 25, he said he kept looking, and that horn, which is our man of lawlessness, was waging war with the saints and overpowering them. He will speak out against the Most High and will wear down the saints of the Highest One, and he will intend to make alterations in time and in law, and they will be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. So he will wear down, he will war against the saints. In Daniel 8:24, the same thing is repeated. He will destroy mighty men and the holy people. In Daniel 11:32 and 35, by smooth words he will turn to godlessness those who act wickedly toward the covenant, but the people who know their God will display strength and take action. And those who have insight among the people will give understanding to the many, yet they will fall by sword and by flame, by captivity and by plunder for many days. And when they fall, they will be granted a little help, and many will join with them in hypocrisy, and some of those who have insight will fall, in order to refine, purge, and make them pure until the end time, because it is still yet to come at its appointed time. And then finally in Daniel 12:7, in the same context, there was a man dressed in linen, and he was above the waters of the river, and he raised his right hand and his left toward heavens, and he swore by him who lives forever. So he's swearing by God. He's making a statement of fact, referencing the desolation of the holy place. Having sworn by God, he said that it would be for a time, times, and half a time, and as soon as they finish shattering the power of the holy people, then all these things will be completed. And then, of course, in Zechariah 13, which we've referenced many times as well, a third of the people there in Israel will be the only ones left. 2/3 of them will be killed off. It will be a bloody mess at that time. But we have plenty of other references. We have persecution of Israel. We know it's coming. We're told the very reason why it's coming in Daniel 9. It is for the purpose to end the sin and transgression of Israel and to bring them back. But in 2 Timothy 3, Paul gives a warning even to the church. And you've heard this one before, but it's way more directly relevant to us as we get to the New Testament. And he begins by saying, know this. This is a statement of fact that we have to keep in mind. It is not something that we're permitted to forget. Know this, you could say, expect this, that in the last days, difficult times will come. For, and see if this sounds familiar, men will be lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, unloving, irreconcilable, malicious gossips, without self-control, without gentleness, without love for good, treacherous, reckless, conceited, and lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. And simultaneous to all that, they are holding to a form of godliness, but having denied its power. And he warns them to keep away from such men as these. These are those that he's described as those who are always learning but never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. These are the difficult times, not only that we've experienced, but are those things that will be experienced in the last days. And it is described with that ominous verb or adjective as being difficult. These will not be easy. And so we could narrow down the sources of persecution. Where is it going to come from? And we can kind of start from the top of the list of antagonists. We would have the dragon, who is the devil, the accuser of the brethren. This is how he's described in the previous chapter in Revelation 12. The dragon is enraged with the woman, who is Israel. He is unable to get to her for the time being. And so what's his next step? He goes off to make war with the rest of her children who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. And so if he had persecuted Christ by means of tempting him in the wilderness, we ought not think ourselves to be exempt. So if Satan targeted Jesus, and he targeted him in the wilderness, and he did so when he thought was the prime opportunity, we can't think ourselves to be exempt. In fact, if anything, it is guaranteed that he would target us, who, unlike Jesus, are actually capable of giving in. We are actually capable of failure, whereas Jesus wasn't. So if the devil's having a hard day, maybe he looks at us as possible easy opportunities. The point simply being that we will be targeted from the top. Peter describes him as a lion going about, he's hunting, looking for anyone who he has the possibility of trying to devour. He looks for the weak ones. But then there's also the world, or the nations, the children of darkness, disobedience, and the children of the father of lies. In John chapter 8, which I'll read here, there's this whole discourse here that Jesus gives regarding the Jews and the Pharisees who were disputing with him. And he says, or they answer and they say to him, Abraham is our father. And Jesus said to them, if you are Abraham's children, you would do the deeds of Abraham. But now you are seeking to kill me, a man who has told you the truth which I heard from God. This Abraham did not do. So you're doing the thing opposite of what Abraham would have done, who was characterized by his belief in God, but you're trying to kill not only someone who is speaking the words of God, you're trying to kill the Son of God. And that is characteristic of their father. You are doing the deeds of your father. And so he accuses them here not only of being evil people, but being the very offspring of the devil, of being people who would only do these things because they are the children of Satan, and it is in their nature, or as Paul labels them, sons of disobedience. It is not a pastime, it's not a hobby for them, it is their nature. It is built into them to do this, not only to live wickedly themselves, but to persecute those who don't. These will do the same things as their father, including acting as pawns for temptation, for frustration, and to attack. And the reason they'll do this is because you're no longer one of them. Like an immune system, they pick out that there is something now foreign, that you don't belong here anymore, that you're not one of them. And they may not even be aware all the time of what they're doing, other than you stand out for a reason they just don't like. In 1 Peter 4, 3-4, he says that the time is already past, which was sufficient for you to have carried out the desires of the Gentiles, having pursued a course of sensuality, lust, drunkenness, carousing, drinking parties, and abominable idolatries. You've already had plenty of time to live like the world, and in all this, they, speaking of the world, are surprised that you do not run with them into the same excesses of dissipation, and so they malign you. You aren't acting like them anymore. You're not behaving like them anymore, and so they malign you. They find you off-putting, out of place, and wrong. They attack you as an intruder. In John 15:19, Jesus said that if you were of the world would love its own, and in its own way. The world is not loving as God is loving, not characteristically selfless, not naturally and not in any righteous sense, but they do love their own. They would rather be surrounded by hypocritical, murdering thieves than by the righteous. It's just, again, they at least can empathize with this. I even see this in modern media, where they find that the unique and lovable characteristic of humanity is its flaws. That, well, we're human, and that's what makes us human, and that's what makes us good, and that's why we should admire humanity. Because we're flawed, because we die, because we're not perfect. But that's not how the love of God is demonstrated. It is demonstrated in spite of the imperfection of humanity, but it has not stayed there. It does not keep them imperfect. Whereas the world would absolutely insist that you stay imperfect. So they treat you as an intruder. You are not of the world because the world loves its own, but because you are not of the world. And how are we not of the world? But I chose you out of the world. Because of this, the world hates you. Again, their hatred is directed towards you because you are the physical, tangible person they can actually go after. They can't go after Christ. And Jesus even warns his disciples of this in advance, that when he would leave them and they could no longer go after him, they would turn their attention to his followers. And then they also persecute by means of religion. The alternatives to the truth will always seek to stamp out the real thing so as to avoid revealing themselves to be fake and useless for eternal things. In Colossians 2:23, Paul references them by saying that these are matters, that is, the commandments and teachings of men, which have, to be sure, the appearance of wisdom, which is in self-made religion and self-abasement and severe treatment of the body. This is what religions do. You go to any foreign country, even looking around us now, these are the characteristics of false religion. And so they have the appearance of religion, and they're very, very attractive appearances. They look very holy, they look very righteous, but there's one problem with them. They are of no value against fleshly indulgence. They're not actually good at what they claim to be good for. They're a sort of placebo medication. And then finally, persecution by means of the church. Those fakes which claim to be Christian will especially seek to silence those who show them for who they are, which is false prophets and liars. This is why Paul had to bring out the points he did to the Corinthians, not once but twice, 2 different letters, because that's what these people were trying to do. They were trying to drive out the real apostle so the fake ones could succeed. In Acts 20, 29 through 30, Paul warns the Ephesian elders, saying that immediately after I'm gone, I know for a fact, not that the Roman centurion will show up with a legion and they will come lead you away to Rome and throw you in the Colosseum. That wasn't his warning. His warning was that after his departure, savage wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock. And from among your own selves, that is the elders, men will arise speaking perverse things. With what intent? Why do they do this? What is their mission set here? To draw away the disciples after themselves. That is their goal. So persecution will come from without. It will come at work when the world finds you to be an intruder or something foreign. It will come from religions who try to argue that Christianity is not as good as theirs. And it will come from Christianity, from fake Christians which claim to say that, no, we are against the world and we're against other religions, but we'll lead you away to a false Christianity. And then we can ask the question, what's the purpose of persecution? Why does this happen? What's the point of it? If we were to have that nightmare scenario, that would probably be one of the questions that pops up. Why is God having this happen? The first point is that it is for the sanctification of the body. Specifically, it is meant to purge. We referenced 1 John 2 last time, that the reason antichrists were allowed into the church, were sent into the church, is to draw out the fakes, is to bring them to the surface like you would when you're refining a metal where the impurities rise up so they can be removed. So it's to purge. It is to verify or to test. In Revelation 2, when he issues a letter to one of the churches, he says, "Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to cast some of you into prison." But then he explains why. "So that you will be tested. And you will have tribulation for 10 days. Be faithful until you're released." Now, he unfortunately doesn't say that, because you can imagine they're reading this letter and they say, all right, tribulation for 10 days. All right, so they're going to have us incarcerated for 10 days. I think I can handle that. But it doesn't say that. He says, you will have tribulation for 10 days. Be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life. And then the other purpose for it is found in John 15. And in John 15, he's going to explain not only the rule set, but why these things are happening. Jesus says in the beginning that I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, he cleans it so that it may bear more fruit. So he is setting the precedence for the Christian life, that the vineyard, as it were, will be full of both the real thing and the fake thing. They're both technically vines. They're both technically look from the same source, but he's going to go through and look for the ones that bear fruit, and he's going to take out the ones that don't, and he's going to do two things. He's going to first look for every branch that does not bear fruit and prune it. He's going to remove it. It is what you could call a resource robber. It is there to drain the resources from the others, and so he removes it. So don't be surprised when the fruitless saints are removed, because they're not actually saints, they are resource robbers. And it is Jesus himself who does this. But then he doesn't stop there, because we could say, all right, well, so long, fakes, I'm happy that I'm here, but now he's going to do something to you. He's going to also clean, he's going to remove the distractions from you. The branch that bears fruit would say, well, I'm already doing good. Look, I have a checklist of all the good things that I'm doing, so now God can leave me alone. But that's not what he does. To whom much is given, they're not given a pat on the back and sent on their way. They are now given more. Much is expected, more is expected. When they have invested their talent and have come back twofold with their return, he then sends them into more. He gives them more. And those who don't bear fruit, the one who has the talent, who has not invested it, that is taken away from him and given to the one to invest more. And so, as the saint, as the Christian, when you bear fruit, expect that God is going to remove distractions from you for the purpose of making you do even better, to be sanctified and to grow. And persecution is one of the ways he will do this. And then in verse 12 through 17, or in John 15, he then continues, "This is my commandment." What is the fruit that he expects? What's the unique characteristic of the saint? That you love one another just as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that he take a day off to go visit his friend, that he sends his friend a card in the mail, that he thinks of his friend every once in a while and sends him money. Nope. Greater love has no one than this, that one lay down his life for his friends. And in case you're unsure of what that means, Jesus says to his disciples that you are my friends if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you slaves, for the slave does not know what his master is doing. But I have called you friends, for all things that I have heard from my Father I have made known to you. And you did not choose me, but I chose you, and I appointed you that you would go and bear fruit, and that your fruit would abide, and that whatever you ask of the Father in my name he may give to you. This I command to you, that you love one another, that there is an extra preference given to the brethren. Christianity is not defined primarily by the love of their enemy. That is a characteristic of Christianity, but that is the baseline characteristic of Christianity. The key characteristic that separates the Christian from the world is their love for the brethren. That is what makes us unique. That is how they will know you are my disciples, which is why it bothers me that churches seem to be primarily designed more for the world and only for the sharing of the gospel and nothing else, ignoring the instruction that the author of Hebrews gives that we move beyond the elementary teachings of the gospel, that we grow. And if you go into any average church and you say, or you ask the question, what is the order of Melchizedek? I don't know if any of them have any idea other than some vague YouTube video they may have watched. And yet that is the standard of the author of Hebrews as to where those people should have been naturally. So the baseline expectation is a preference for the church. The church was designed for the brethren. And the reason we share the gospel is to get more people to come into the church to bear more fruit, not to stagnate. And so the purpose of persecution is to drive out the fakes and to grow the real. And then finally, in John 15 and verse 18, if the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own, but because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, because of this, the world hates you. And so if they persecuted me, they will persecute you also, but all of these things they will do to you. Why? What's the reason they're doing it? They are doing it all to you for my name's sake, because they do not know the one who sent me. If I had not come and spoken to them, they would not have sinned, but now they have no excuse for their sin. So when we show up and we share the truth and we share the gospel and we demonstrate it and we grow fruit, they hate us because of that, because of who we represent and because it reveals them for who they are. They no longer have an excuse. Once you hear the gospel, you can no longer say, I didn't know. You just can't. It removes that excuse. And so they hate you for that. And he who hates me hates my Father also. And so then he carries on there. So our suffering will be for the purpose of pruning us, verifying that we are his disciples, and will cause us to grow more fruit. In other words, if the world comes to persecute us, it will be for these purposes, and through that suffering we will get the opportunity to prove not only who we are, but in a much greater sense, we and the world will get to see that we truly are his disciples. It will reveal us and to the world that we actually belong to God, that we're not simply just some random weirdo off the street, but that we belong to God specifically. So now we get to our text here in Revelation 13. When it set all that up to set up why these things are going to happen, because really this text is not immensely confusing, it's not immensely complex. Unfortunately, to the one who might be afraid of persecution, this text is not vague. In Revelation 13, starting at verse 6, and he, that is the beast with his mouth, the man of lawlessness, he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven. And again, you can see what's happening here. This is exactly what Jesus said would happen in John 15. They will blaspheme or persecute you for the name's sake of Christ. So here we see the mouth blaspheming not only God, not only Christ, but also his name, and thus by extension, his people. But he blasphemes those who are in heaven. He blasphemes the one he can't get to. So in other words, he'll persecute you here, and then when you die, he'll then try to accuse you or otherwise go after you there. And it was also given to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given over every tribe and people and tongue and nation. These were given to him. And all who dwell on the earth will worship him. Everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who had been slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is destined for captivity, to captivity he will go. If anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. Here is the perseverance and the faith of the saints. And I've read this one in advance many times in advance, and it's that last one there that at first seems confusing. Are we saying that the perseverance of the saints is that they will be imprisoned and killed? It seems a little strange, almost contradictory, almost like a paradox. How is it that we will persevere by means of being taken captive and killed? How is that hopeful? And some, in other texts, will say, well, if I don't think it's hopeful or comforting, then I must change what it means. But we'll take it at face value here. So let's get our characters in order here. Who are we talking about? The dragon, again, we talked about him. He blasphemes both God and those who dwell above with God, and wishes to destroy both Israel and those who follow Christ. And in order to accomplish these goals, he unleashes the beast. So he tries to go after the woman. She's taken to her place in the wilderness where she's kept safe for 3.5 years. So he can't get after her, so he turns his attention to the saints. And as a result of that mission set, he then goes and calls the beast from the sea and the beast from the earth. So we know what he's trying to do. And then we have the two beasts. We have the beast from the sea and the beast from the earth, which we'll get to next time. The beast from the sea obviously represents that governing body we've discussed before, at the head of which, the mouth of which is going to be the man of lawlessness. These are spiritual forces which control governing forces, which will take over the world. So, all that to say that the beast, in this simple sense here, represents the fact that the world will be no longer just partially against us. It will be in its entirety organized against us. They will be sorted, put in their places, brought under subjection, and then turned as a weapon. So you could say that it's you versus, 8-9 billion other people, in part, and then the people we don't know about. So there's that context there. The beasts are to represent and to show how the world will be turned against us, both in government and others. So we have the dragon, we have the beast, and then we have the saints. Specifically those who believe in Christ. These are not referencing just anybody. Sometimes when we look at the word or the phrase the holy people, it's referencing Israel because in a sense they are set apart. They are a unique people. However, 2/3 of them will be removed from the group of Israel because they are not actually the elect of Israel. They will be killed off, as Daniel says, to refine them, to bring them down to a remnant that God will then restore. But in this case, we're not speaking purely of them. We are speaking of the saints, those who keep the testimony of Christ. We're looking at Christians. These are the targets of this war with the saints. We will be, assuming we're alive at the time, we will be the targets of the dragon and the beast. Being future residents of heaven who are still accessible to the dragon. Because remember, in the previous chapter, the devil is no longer in heaven. He has been cast out. The prosecutor who was spending day and night accusing the brethren has now been driven out. He is no longer allowed in heaven. He will never appear in heaven again. He's been driven out, thrown down to the earth. He's got a short time to live. He can't go back up there and start accusing the brethren anymore. So he blasphemes God, he blasphemes his name, and he blasphemes those who are up there. And then he turns his gaze towards the people he can get at, which would be us. What kind of war are we talking about here? You could label it down to 3 kinds of war, but really it's every kind. It would be spiritual warfare. Again, we started last time with the Antichrist and what that is. That is a spiritual warfare that's happening. John says that there isn't just one Antichrist coming, but many have already gone out of the world. An Antichrist, as a reminder, is not purely someone who is against Christ. It is a replacement, a substitute, and a alternative version of. That's Jesus' warning in Matthew 24. There will be many who claim they are Christ or who represent Christ. So the first front of this warfare will be on the spiritual front. Again, for the purpose of the Antichrist, to draw out the fakes, those who leave us who are not actually of us. That will be the first front. The second front will be political. It will start with the formation of the beasts, as they begin to create a governing body which will succeed, one which will begin as its own isolated thing, but then grow into subjecting all the other nations, and then finally it turns into physical. And we know that, and we know how effective it is, not simply because we are told that he will overcome the saints here. In case it's confusing as to how he overcomes them, it does not mean that they all apostatize. We know many will, per Paul's warning in 2 Thessalonians and 1 Timothy 4. But we know the effectiveness of this campaign against the saints because we've already read the outcome of it back in Revelation chapter 7, which I'll read a little later. But what we see there is a massive group of people, a countless multitude. And so John asks the stander-by, who are these people? And he is told, these are those who are, and it's in an active sense, they are coming out of the Great Tribulation. These are those who were in the Great Tribulation who are now in the process of coming out of it. And how did they come out of it? Well, we are given the same description for their attire, what they're wearing, and it matches this description of the attire of the saints under the altar who were descriptive as being martyrs. In other words, they have the same attire, the same general description, and so what we see is a multitude of people coming out of the Great Tribulation who were martyred, who were killed. So it's a very effective campaign. When it says he overcomes the saints, it means he does so en masse. He will not be poorly, it will not be poorly done. He won't be bad at this. He will be very efficient. And there's a reason why he does this, or how he is able to even do this later, because it describes those martyrs as those from every tribe and people and tongue and nation, which is the same list that we are told this beast rules over. That is, given authority for him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and authority over every tribe, people, tongue, nation. These were given to him. So the way he is able to execute this plan at such scale is because he effectively has the entire world at his disposal to accomplish this. So there won't be a nation you can run to hide from what's coming. He will also overcome the nations. He will bring all of them, every king, every governor, every state, every continent will be brought under his control. Now, it will be done by force, as we've discussed before. They don't just fall into line. He beats them into submission, and he conquers them with constant war and subjugation. So by this point, he, that is this beast in his mouth, will either be in the process of subjecting the secular nations to his authority, or he will have already accomplished it. Not exactly sure where this falls on that timeline, other than it will be done. Either way, he will have them at his disposal for this war. Because, and you could say, all right, well, why do the nations do this? Do they do it reluctantly? Do they not want to persecute the saints, but he makes them do it? No, because as we've already established, and as Jesus already said, the beast is coming along to those who already have a natural disposition against us, and they have a common enemy. So we read that the beast will war against the nations, so there's a conflict, but then he's able to unify them because they have a common enemy, and that would be us. And this authority is given to the beast. That he is not simply just really smart. This success is granted to him. By who? Who is the one who is letting him do this? Who is giving him the authority and the effectiveness and the circumstances and the politics and the words and the forces to be able to accomplish this goal? Well, in a technical sense, it's the devil because he gives him all of his authority. But how is the devil ever allowed to do it? Now, this is given to the beast by God. The devil and his agents are not capable of taking or doing anything that is not permitted by God. And here we see that the beast is specifically granted the authority to do these things, but it is for the purposes of God to accomplish. And here's a clarifier, because, all right, he wars against the saints. He seeks to overcome them. This does not indicate that we will create Christian armies to war against the beast. We are not going to say, all right, he's going to war against us, so that means we need to create our own flag, and we need to have our own nation and get our own armies together and organize. That is not what is being indicated here.
The very tone of this text is that the enemy will wage a war against a foe that doesn't fight back. That's what makes this text so ominous, is we're not told he will come to war against you, so quick, gather together resources so you can fight back. There is no precedence for that in the Old or New Testament regarding this time period to any extent. Thus, the instruction in this context for the saints to accept their fate in captivity and death. Christians are never characterized as those who seek to overthrow governments in rebellion and military action, even when that government is the enemy of the church. Again, we have given ample opportunity when Pilate has Jesus at his disposal, and he asks him, "Are you not a king? And if you're a king, what's going on? At least speak, at least fight back." But we know Jesus' answer. It's easy to know his answer, but to apply it is much harder in this context. That his kingdom is not of this world, and if it were, we would be fighting. But by implication, that means we're not fighting because it's not of this world. The only one who will overthrow the nations is the Lord himself when he comes to reign. Until that time, our focus is on faith and endurance, not combat. That you have, on the one hand, the enemy, the list of antagonists, whose purpose is to war against us, but the reason they're doing it is because they are fighting an inevitable fate. He knows his time is short, the devil. He knows he doesn't have much time, and so he wars against to every extent he possibly can. He pulls out every stop because he has nothing left to look forward to except his own demise. But that's not our character. What does it mean when it says he will overcome them? Well, all we have to do is consider what his expectations are. What are his goals? Well, to bring all living people under his reign, so he seeks to subject all the nations. To make all of the inhabitants of the earth worship him as a god, and we know this will happen. All who are not in the Lamb's Book of Life will worship him. It is inevitable. And to eliminate any opposition to his rule. In particular, the true church of God, which stands in contrast to the fake church of the fake God. But he will institute a global worship, and we even see that at first he may allow other versions, other Christs, other Christianity to show up. But by the time you get to Revelation 17, he no longer tolerates alternatives. He devours the woman, and now there is one religion left, and it is one Christianity left, and any opposition, namely us, he'll try to stamp out. This statement here, that all who dwell on the earth will worship him, indicates that he will succeed. Again, that is the two parallel narratives of this text here are, on the one hand, the enemy will succeed. He's not trying to succeed. It's not that he has a good chance of succeeding. It will happen. And we know it will happen because God has decreed it to happen, and there is nobody who's going to stop it. It has already been determined that it will happen, to what extent it will happen, by what means it will happen, the name by which it will happen, and even the length of time it is allowed to happen for. It is going to happen. These will worship him as God after he declares himself to be so in the temple of God. And we'll deal more with what that religion looks like next time when we get to the beast of the earth. But here's a warning. All right, so, it's really bad, right? There's going to be worshiping. We've seen depictions of this. They're worshiping the man of lawlessness. They think he's Christ, or they think he's God, and there's a whole system. They've got the mark of the beast, and I'm not taking that mark, and I'll fight back. And, I have no doubt there will be fervency in that resistance for the first week. Because, there's excitement to it. Great, this is it. Here we go. This is what we've been waiting for. We're ready to go. Give it a week. When you're no longer allowed to go out shopping, because you don't have any money that's allowed to be used, when you no longer have a home to go to, when you're constantly on the run, when you're under constant threat of death, when you're barely making out alive, and many around you are not making out alive, or they're hauled off to imprisoned. A week, try not shopping for a week. See how easy that gets. It's already hard enough to go if we miss breakfast, lunch, and dinner one day. It's barely holding it together, much less not being able to have the resources, and more specifically the lifestyle that we are accustomed to. We are very, very comfortable here. And so the warning is this: never underestimate the allure of a chance at returning to a normal life. This will be the temptation. It won't even just be, bow to this beast, bow to this image, or we'll kill you. That's not even the biggest temptation, because there will be many who might even not mean it. They'll just do it just to get back to normal. All right, give me the mark so I can just go back to Walmart and finally buy stuff again. I don't have to have a difficult week anymore. I can go back to my job. I'm tired of all this upheaval. Because here's the real challenge here. Once this begins, we will never go back to this life. It's done. Every nostalgic thing you have, every nice pleasantry, every hobby, it's gone. That's it. It's gone. It's done. We're never going back. And that sounds, exciting for the person who's tired of it at first, but when you're faced with the polar opposite of it, it will be immensely tempting to give in simply so that it's not hard anymore. I just want to go back to normal. And in case you think that just seems unprecedented, what did the Israelites do not too long after they crossed the Red Sea and watched the Egyptian army get wiped out? One moment they see their bodies washing up on the shore, and the next they want to go back. One moment they're screaming for salvation from their enslavement to the evil Pharaoh, and the next, well, it wasn't that bad. At least we're in the wilderness eating the same thing every day. And as silly as that seems, never underestimate how tempting normalcy is. And so, here's the instruction. How do we deal with that? We have a statement given here that he will succeed. Authority is given to him. You can't take it. God is the one who lets him have it. And everyone on the earth will worship. You will be outnumbered 8 billion to 1. Everyone else will be doing it. Everyone else will seem to have at least better lives than you do. The peer pressure will be unprecedented. And the convenience of giving in also unprecedented. So now, we can look at verse 9 and 10. And you could sum up this first thing. It says, if anyone has an ear, let him hear. This is an interesting one that he puts in here, because we've seen something similar to this said repeatedly, which is, behold, look, 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 a great sign in heaven, look, another sign in heaven, look at these people, look at this thing. But now we're being told to listen. And this phrase might sound familiar to you. The one who has an ear. This is the same phrase used by the Lord himself on earth in Matthew 11:15, Matthew 13:9, Matthew 13:43, Mark 4:9, Luke 8:8, Luke 4:14:35. This is a phrase Jesus uses. But it should sound even more familiar to the student of Revelation. Because if you go back to the 7 letters that introduce this entire thing, at the end of every single one of those letters, this phrase is used. And in that particular context, these letters, this is where I really want to focus in as to its use there, because its use there is the same here. This phrase is used specifically in regards to those who endure testing and suffering. So, give you a quick rundown to the church at Ephesus. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To him who overcomes, I will grant to eat of the tree of life which is in the paradise of God. The church at Smyrna. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who overcomes will not be hurt by the second death. Pergamum. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To him who overcomes, to him I will give some of the hidden manna, and I will give him a white stone with a new name written on the stone, which no one knows but he who receives it. To Thyatira, he who overcomes, and he who keeps my deeds until the end, to him I will give him authority over the nations, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron, as the vessels of the potter are broken to pieces, as I also have received authority from my Father, and I will give him the morning star. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who overcomes, to the church at Sardis, will thus be clothed in white garments, and I will not erase his name from the book of life. Again, in contrast to the ones whose names are not written in the book. And I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. And to the church at Philadelphia, he who overcomes, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God, and he will not go out from it any more. and I will write on him the name of my God, and in the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from my God, and my new name. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. And then finally, even Laodicea, he who overcomes, I will grant to him to sit down with me on my throne, as I also, and know the word here, as I also overcame, and sat down with my Father on his throne. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. So here you have this constant use of the word overcome, 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 overcome. So while the devil and the beast are busy overcoming us in a temporal sense, they are overcoming the overcomers in an eternal sense. The overcomers that we are has nothing to do with the here and now and everything to do with what's going to come, with that list of 7 promises that Jesus gives to those who do overcome. So while we're being overcome, we are in the middle of overcoming something far worse, far more important. So how do we do this? How do we do this? All right, so we go back to our section here. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. All right, so it's the same introduction. Pay attention, listen. In the light of what's coming, and in the light of why it is coming, pay attention. And I've looked around, I'm pretty sure all of us have ears. So, what are we supposed to hear? If anyone is destined for captivity, to captivity he goes. If you are caught and put in prison, you're going to prison. And if anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. This is the perseverance and the faith of the saints. Now, the explanation for this one is, for lack of a better term, awesome. Because now we get to really dig into why he says this. First, it's resolve. Accept why it is happening. Again, we've already explained why persecution is happening. So accept why this is happening to you. Don't resist it. Don't fight it. Don't be characterized as someone who just goes kicking and screaming. Accept it. Be resolved. We sing the song, I am resolved. All right, well, let's find out if you are when this happens. There is no command anywhere in the Old or New Testament for the saints to raise an army, gather weapons, and fight the rising beasts. In fact, it would appear to the world, at least, that we are almost turning over and letting it happen. That they're almost caught off guard by the fact that we're not doing what they would do. That when they're being brought into captivity and they're trying to kill you with the sword, but we fight back. That's what the world does. And so they're almost taken aback as to why we don't seem to be doing that. Again, there's no instruction for us to do anything, especially in this particular context, as it regards any political or militaristic fighting. There is no instruction for the church to form a new political party to fight the beast. So there's the beast, but then we have the political party of the woman. And so we're going at each other and going to try to win elections against the beast. That is not the attitude here. Again, it's the opposite. While there will certainly be an urge in some to do this, this will be more akin to Peter's desire to draw his sword rather than Christ, who told him to accept what was about to happen. And it's in that context that we really find the explanation for this. Because that phrase, he who kills with the sword will be killed by the sword, should sound very familiar. When did Jesus say that, and to whom did he say it? He didn't just say that randomly. He didn't even say it when he told the disciples to gather together swords for their various journeys. He told it when they had come to take him captive, when he had been betrayed by his own, when it all seems to be falling apart, and they're about to take him captive. And Peter, in his zeal, wishing to defend the Lord and to defend his disciples and likely himself, draws that sword, lops off the ear of the servant of the high priest, and you might think that the others will draw their swords and Jesus says to charge, and there they go, but he doesn't do that. What does he tell him to do? To put it away. Put your sword back. But why? He's not calling Peter to be a pacifist. He's calling to be something better than a pacifist. The pacifist is one who just does not fight for anything. But this is someone who is fighting for something, just not what's immediately in front of him. Because he tells Peter to put the sword back, because if you wish to live that way, if that's how you're going to look at persecution and what's coming, then that's how you're going to go. If in these days you choose to draw the sword, to draw the firearm, here's what you're going to expect. You will lose. You will absolutely lose. You stand no chance there. Even if you tried to form an army, it is doomed to failure because God has doomed it to failure, because that is not why this is happening. But there's another context, and this is the one that really connected the dots for me. Jesus does not say, put your sword back and never fight for anything at any time. He doesn't say that. It is in the context of prophetic fulfillment that he says this. He effectively looks at Peter and says, put your sword away. How else is the scripture supposed to be fulfilled if you're trying to stop it? Scripture is actively being fulfilled in front of you, and you're panicking, and when you should be rejoicing. So he puts away the sword, they all scatter, and Jesus goes off and is crucified, just as God said and commanded would happen. And so in the same context here, we know that the authority is given to the beast by God. The authority to overcome the saints is given to him by God. The authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation is given to him by God. But we look past that. Why is that happening? What is the end goal of all of this? Who comes after all of that? Who comes to slay the beast? The reference there in Daniel 7. One like the Son of Man who comes in the clouds and he beats him up. He overcomes him. So we're not bothered by the stuff that's happening for a moment. So this is specifically in regards to the fact that when they were coming face to face with the prophesied events to happen, any resistance to the fulfillment of these things would befit only one sort of person, and that would be the enemy. I would expect the enemy to not want these things to happen. So, do not fight what God has ordained. If you're taken into prison, don't view that as merely persecution. View it as testing, as refining, and I think, above all, as validation, because congratulations, you're in good company. Isn't that the list there in Hebrews? Of all these people who suffered in the same way? And Paul and Silas, what did they do when they were in prison? And you say, well, yeah, but they were in prison. They didn't get the opportunity. They were shackled up there. They couldn't do anything. Okay, well, an earthquake showed up, supernatural activity by God, broke open all the doors, and the jailer's going to kill himself because that's it. But the unique part of that text was not the earthquake, it's the fact that Paul and Silas didn't leave, that they didn't go running out the moment an opportunity appeared. In fact, the whole reason they were imprisoned unjustly was so that they could lead the very imprisoner himself, the jailer, to repentance, which is where we get the phrase, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" And what were they doing while they were imprisoned? They were singing. Why were they rejoicing? Because they were counted as worthy to suffer in the same way their Lord had. So if you're taken to prison, joyfully accept it. Be the happy captive. An even greater comparison can be realized when we compare ourselves in such a condition that the Lord was also in prison the night before his crucifixion. He who could have summoned legions of angels did not even make a single attempt to escape. This is what baffled Pilate. Why aren't you trying to get out of this? Was effectively his question. And then when it comes to death, specifically in regards to the use of the sword, again, this is a direct reference to the words that Jesus said to Peter on the night he was betrayed and taken captive. So if we think that this is an endorsement for Christians to wield the sword in any attempt to stop the rise of this enemy, we need only look at the context of that night. This was in prophetic fulfillment, as is what we will be facing here. And there will be victory, just not by your hands, but by one better. Victory and vengeance are coming. The martyrs under the altar, they're in Revelation 6. They cry out for vengeance, and they will have it. Just not yet. The ones they're told to wait for, more residents of heaven, that will be the ones here who are being slain by the sword. They're about to join them there. Any suffering we may face here will pale in comparison to what the world will have. And this is what I want to really end with. As bad as it might seem for us, if you really want to understand why it's phrased this way, authority is given to him, and who dwell on the earth will worship him. But then there's this phrase here. Everyone whose name that has not been written from the foundation of the world in the Lamb's book of life who had been slain. You do not want to be in that category. You could look ahead. I've been already looking ahead at the day of judgment. There is no more terrifying text in all of Scripture to me to have to look through and study, because what you see in that day is not simply judgment, it is very judicial. Each person who will stand on that day before the great white throne of judgment after the millennial reign has come and gone, every person who stands there on that day will be given the opportunity to represent themselves. Books are opened. Why are books opened? Well, because the charges against them are laid out. Here's every sin you've ever committed, the things you should have done, the things you didn't do, all the lines you've transgressed, all the lines you failed to meet, all the ways you fell short of the glory of God, documented thoroughly in every thought and intention of your heart. All there. Here they all are. You can read them. Here's the whole document, everything you've ever done. Also, here's the law that you've transgressed. And then next to those things is the scariest book of all, the book of all the names of the elect of God. And so they're given a chance to give their testimony. They get to go up and they get to make their case to God. He lets them talk. That's why we have the group there in Matthew 7. He lets them talk. And you will see some who say, Lord, look at all the things we did in your name. Others will say, I thought you were cruel and unfair. He lets all of them go. But the thing they don't expect is that he also answers them. But he gives them the case. And then after they make their testimony, the last book is opened. All right, you've had your time. Now let's go see if you're in that book. And not one person on that day will have their name found. They won't. There's not going to be one person on that day of judgment that has their name located in the book. And there will be no scarier feeling because of what you're standing right over top of, which is the lake of fire, which you've watched 10,000 other people already get thrown in, and now it's your turn to try to make your case. So we look at these people. These are those who are characterized as not having their name written in that book. It's not there. Now, we don't know who they are. I am not. God is sovereign. I am not. I do not know who the elect of God are and are not, which is why we share the gospel. But then we have the contrast there. No matter what they do to me, those who can kill the body, my name is written down. And that's where the resolve is. That's how we can really approach this. This is where I want to end, and we'll go slightly over time because this is the most important part. Those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life. This is where we have our solace. This is where we embrace it wholeheartedly. These are those whose names are not only written in the book, but they are written by the hand of God. And these are those whose names were written down before the foundation of the earth. Now, I know some will cringe at that phrase, but it means exactly what it says it means. That before you were ever created, before the world was ever created, God had your name written down. And before we go down some long tangent about how we think that's unfair, look at it from this perspective. That it means that no matter what happens, God has already set me aside. There's no one who can do anything about it. Before they were ever born, the outcome is already guaranteed. So just as the beast authority was guaranteed, even more so is my state after that. Paul in Romans 8, we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are the called according to his purpose. Our purpose in this suffering is to prove how faithful he is. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to become conformed to the image of his Son. So in that day of judgment behind the throne, there will be all the sons of God, all the children of God who have been conformed to his image, so that he would be the firstborn among many brethren. And these whom he predestined, he also called. And those whom he called, he also justified. And those whom he justified, we will see in this day, he also glorified. I like the way, I had to write it down when I heard it in passing. I was listening to a sermon by John MacArthur, and I love the way he phrased this. The point is this, that the elect cannot be lost by virtue of the decree itself of election, but they cannot be lost doubly by virtue of the atoning work of Christ, which is so proficient as to guarantee the eternality of their redemption. In other words, it's not just the book of life, it's the Lamb's book of life who had been slain. His death guaranteed the outcome for those whose names were already written in it. This is the event where God separates the wheat from the chaff. This is where the reals are separated from the fake. This is where we find out that God is the one who is at work in us, and we have something far better to look forward to than some temporary suffering. Good text to read for that. 1 Peter 4, 12 through 19, 2 Peter 2, or 1 Peter 2, 13 through 25, explaining why suffering happens. But then really to end it, all we need to do is look in Revelation 7, that text I said I would read earlier. Verses 9 through 17. After these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude, which no one could count, from every nation and tribe and peoples and tongues. Now, it's easy to think, well, they're all martyred. That's scary. But no. Look at what characterizes this group. This is not a pessimistic text. Standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, and palm branches were in their hands, and they cry out with a loud voice, not, God, why did you let this happen to me? Oh, that was too hard. No. Salvation to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. And all the angels were standing around the throne, and the elders and the four living creatures, and they fell on their faces before the throne and worshipped God. This is a celebration that you get to enter into. And they're saying, Amen. The blessing and the glory and the wisdom and the thanksgiving and the honor and the power and the strength to our God forever and ever. Amen. So this is a celebration. This is a worshiping moment here in heaven before the throne of God. And John asks, or then one of the elders asked John, saying, These who are clothed in white robes, who are they? And from where have they come? And I said to him, My Lord, you know. And he said to me, These are the ones who are coming out of the great tribulation, and they have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. For this reason, they are before the throne of God, and they serve him day and night in his sanctuary, and he who sits on the throne will dwell over them. And they will no longer hunger, nor thirst any more, nor will the sun beat down on them, nor any heat. For the Lamb at the center of the throne will shepherd them and will guide them to the springs of the water of life, and God will wipe every tear from their eyes. That is where they go. It is not any loss, it is a temporary inconvenience. So when we look at this, and as we get into next time, what that religion looks like and what the persecution might appear as, practically speaking, we overcome because the outcome is already guaranteed. They persecute because they're in a panic, because they're losing what they have. They have nothing left to look forward to, even if you take your own prisoner. This is the last image I'll leave with you, and then we'll be done. I just love this picture. You've been taken captive. Maybe some friends or family have been killed along the way. It's pretty bad. Okay, but you're right. You're in your jail cell now, and you realize, all right, this is it. But you got to watch your jailer there. Maybe he's mocking or whatever and having what seems to be a grand old time, but what does he get to go home to? Again, where are we at in this timeline? We're in the Great Tribulation. These are coming out of, these guys are in it. What home does he have to go home to? We've talked about before, billions of people are dying of all kinds of things here. They are undergoing the full wrath of God. What he goes home to is probably worse than the jail cell you're in. His life, that God whose job is to keep you in that jail cell, is far worse than yours ever will be. And he has nothing left to look forward to. The world outside that jail cell will be far worse. So even if you gave in to the temptation to go back to a normal life, it won't be there when you come home, if you have a home. This is it. This is the end. So that's why Revelation ends the way it does. And if you have ears, which you do, then listen to that. Because this is the promise of God, the guarantee of the enemy's authority, the guarantee of its time limit, and the guarantee of why it happens and what we have to look forward to. Our names, if we are in Christ, are written down. No one can blot it out. No one can touch it. So if anything, we look at the world with pity, even while they're persecuting us, because they have nothing left to look forward to. Let's pray. Thank you, Father, for the time, for the opportunity, and for the words that you've given for our ears to hear. But I ask that we take that command seriously, and that we not only look forward to the days of testing, of refinement, so that we get to see, even if it's not in the end, we get to see in every day that we are who you made us to be, that we get to see yourself in us more and more, and that we get to grow and be sanctified in your word, which is the truth, and that we get to know you more. I thank you that we get to have these opportunities, and I ask only that we get to see them for what they are and long for them all the more. And that should you grant us the privilege of being able to be those testimonies in those last days, that we would be eager for them, knowing what waits on the other side, that it is only a temporary inconvenience, and that we long to be those lining up and singing in captivity or in death. We thank you, Father, for the resolve and the guarantee that you give us. For it is in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.